Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Who Died with Pete and Alex. It's the weekly show where we talk about the famous, infamous, and other noteworthy people who joined the choir invisible in the past week. And hello, Pete.
Hi, Alex. How's it going?
I understand you have our first honoree today, Newton Minow.
I do. Newton Norman Minow, passed away on May 6th at the age of 97. Was born January 17th, 1926, and then came to fame in 1961 when he was appointed by President Kennedy to be one of the 7 commissioners of the Federal Communications Commission, and he was then boosted to be the chairman. He was in charge of the FCC, and most notable, for good and bad. Some people took it in different ways, but he's most known for a speech known as the Wasteland speech. When television is good, nothing, not the theater, not the magazines or the newspapers, nothing is better. But when television is bad, nothing is worse. I invite each of you to sit down in front of your television set when your station goes on the air and stay there for a day without a book, without a magazine, without a newspaper, without a profit and loss sheet or a rating book to distract you. Just keep your eyes glued to the set until the station signs off, and I can assure you, what you will observe is a vast wasteland. That's why it's called the Wasteland speech. And the wasteland has become kind of a derogatory synonym for TV since then.
Yeah. This was in the 60s?
This was 1961.
Okay. Well,
May
wow.
1961.
So, yeah.
A lot of these will sound familiar. He said you'll see a procession of game shows, formula comedies about totally unbelievable families, blood and thunder, mayhem, violence, sadism, murder, Western bad men, Western good men, not so much Westerns these days. Privatized gangsters, more violence, and cartoons, and endlessly commercials. Many screaming, cajoling, and offending. And most of all, boredom. You'll see a few things you'll enjoy, but they will be very, very few. And if you think I exaggerate, I only ask you to try it. And so that understandably rubbed a few people the wrong way, but then also kind of rallied other people. And he throughout his life, he was just like, yeah, it's the 2 words that he's best remembered for are going to be vast wasteland, but he would much rather people remember that he be remembered for the words public interest, because that was the main focus of that speech, that he's like, we need to do more with TV. It wasn't like TV is bad, it should be eradicated. It's like TV is bad, we need to make more good TV. And so he was important in expanding, I forgot the exact name of it, but he basically made, it was government mandate that all TVs should be able to receive UHF stations, so there would be more options for everybody, and that led then to more public television options, and he was kind of involved in that, making sure there was more television in the public service available.
So we have him to thank for Weird Al's first movie.
Exactly. One of those who objected to his characterization of the television landscape, obviously people working in TV weren't too happy about it, and one Sherwood Schwartz, when he was making the television show Gilligan's Island, named the ill-fated boat after one Mr. Newton Minow.
Oh, is that true?
So
that's really
that's
funny.
True. Purportedly, that's what Schwartz said. That's what some other people have said. So, and another historical footnote. That in 1988, on the recommendation of his daughter was a law professor. Daughter followed in his footsteps as a law professor, and said, "Hey, one of my law students is really good. You should, if you're looking for people in your law firm." He was working at a law firm at the time. He was, continued to practice law after he left his government position. He's like, "Hey, if you're looking for somebody, you should hire this guy. He's really smart, really good. He's really with it." And so he hired a summer associate named Barack Obama. And that is where Barack Obama met one Michelle Robinson, who he would later marry.
Oh, no relation. Wow. So he really did have an impact on culture at large just by,
Yeah, twofold. I mean,
yeah.
He had 2 swings at the bat of changing the way that we lived. Gilligan's Island and the Obama administration are 2 kind of tent poles of society.
Do you know, we are, I guess, are living in the post-platinum age of television. Do you know if his opinion changed, in the era of The Sopranos and Breaking Bad and all these legendary shows that are now held up as the new standards for what?
I don't think so, because I think it still fit with his assessment that when it's good, nothing is better.
Yeah.
He's like, you'll find these high points, that there will be amazing things, but there's also just so much garbage out there.
Yeah.
But I mean, the same is true for a lot of different media. You know what I mean? There's so much garbage.
I'm glad he lived.
I forgot whose corollary it was, that 90% of anything is crap. But
Sturgeon's law, I think.
Could be, yeah.
I'm just glad he lived to see the streaming era, the golden age that is the streaming era. So.
Yes, yeah. He just was able to just. Yeah, that he probably appreciated that more, because then you have choice. You have your own options. You can choose what you're putting into your brain. You're not just sitting there having it zapped into you.
Yeah,
so.
That's true.
Well, Alex, who's your first honoree this week?
Well, I wanted to honor pitching legend Vida Blue. Vida Rochelle Blue Jr. His full name.
Junior.
Died at the age of 73 this past week. He was a left-handed pitcher. He pitched in the Major League Baseball from 1969 to 1986, which seems like a long career for a pitcher. Maybe back then people, I think, pitched longer than they do nowadays. But anyway, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Probably the peak of his fame and career was he was the pitcher for the Oakland A's when they won the World Series in 1972, 1973, and 1974. So 3 back-to-back World Series for Mr. Blue. He was a 6-time All-Star and one of only 5 pitchers who pitched for the American League and the National League over the course of his career in the All-Star game. He was a starting pitcher in the All-Star game for the National League and for the American League.
I was going to question your math on that for a second. I was like, wait a minute, but that's for starting All-Star game pitcher. Sure, yes, that makes sense. Yeah, I like that you're coming in with a sports honoree. That's I like this side of you.
Yeah, Vida Blue. I mean, sports generally, I'm not that into, but Vida Blue was someone I remember the baseball card of, just because it was such an unusual name, Vida Blue. And I was hoping when I looked up what his full name was, I was going to find out that Vida was short for Vidowski or something like that. But nope, just Vida Rochelle Blue Jr. So the old man was Vida Rochelle Blue Sr. And after baseball, he became a sportscaster for NBC News. And last interesting tidbit, in 1989, he got married at Candlestick Park on the pitcher's mound. So that's a true baseball, a true baseball fan. So goodbye, Vida Blue. Do you have any memories of Vida Blue particularly?
No, it's just one of those names that I know. I don't even think I had my brief dalliance with baseball cards. I don't think I think he was already kind of out of the game by then.
Yeah, probably.
But I one of those names that kind of stands out. That's always just like, oh yeah, right. And I think they were on the same team. Catfish Hunter and Raleigh Fingers and stuff like that with those guys. Where I'm like, oh yes, men with interesting names from slightly before my era where I was paying attention.
And Raleigh had that curly cute mustache too, right? Wasn't that
right?
He had two gimmicks going on. So
So it was a different time then.
Yeah, need to bring back those curly cute mustaches.
Speaking of, while we're in the sports arena, if you will,
sure.
I also have an athlete who sadly left us this week.
Who's that?
May the 4th. He's no longer with us. It's Petr Klíma. Petr Klíma. Age 58. So he was born after the Wasteland speech given by Newton Minow. Like after that happened, like years later, Petr Klíma was born. And he was born in Czechia, I believe we're calling it now. It was the Czech Republic for a while. It was Czechoslovakia, I believe, at the time, 64. He was a Czech ice hockey forward, played in the NHL for the Red Wings, Oilers, Lightning, Kings, Pittsburgh Penguins. And he was the first Czech player to defect directly to a U.S. team. The Canadian teams, I guess, because of they weren't as culturally at war with the Soviet bloc. Like it was easier to kind of get Canadian players to defect. But the Detroit Red Wings, they picked him in the 5th round, the 83 entry draft, and they immediately, basically the World Juniors, which is where it's like the under 18 championship of hockey. The 84 World Juniors, they were already kind of reaching out to him and be like, hey, we drafted you. If you want to come play for us, we can help work this out. And he said, like, I would love to do this. This is my dream, but I have to wait until I complete my military duty, because everybody in Czechoslovakia had to serve. I guess when they turned 18, maybe they serve a short stint in the military. And he's like, I have to wait until after I do that, because then otherwise I will be not only will I be a defector, but I'll be a deserter as well. And that's like extra. There'll be extra after me. So 1985, he does his military stint, comes out, and then immediately like working with the Detroit Red Wings, and the Detroit Red Wings were working with Ed Meese and the Deputy Attorney General Lowell Jensen in kind of setting up this expedited political asylum. And so the Red Wing, they went to a training camp. The Czech, I think, national team was doing a training camp in West Germany. And the Red Wings officials went over, and they're like, all right, as soon as you're done eating, instead of going with your team, come with us. And they just drove him, secreted him away to a secret location, hung out, moved city to city for a couple of days to keep the fuzz off their back. And then once they had everything kind of streamlined as far as the extradition kind of, the political asylum process, they skirted him away to sunny old Detroit, Michigan. And then in honor of his successful defection, he wore sweater number 85. His number in pretty much all of his stops in hockey was 85, because that's the year that he defected. So it's kind of like that was the number that he chose to represent that kind of happy occurrence in his life, 85, which I think he wore it in everywhere else that he went. So,
wow, that's cool.
And he scored the game-winning goal in the longest Stanley Cup Finals game in history. Third overtime of Game 1 of the 1990 Stanley Cup Finals.
So he was a hero for everyone, because everyone's like, let's get this thing over with.
Yeah, I got places to be. But he was actually like somewhat troubled on and off the ice. He was never like he was always good, but never the kind of superstar that he could be. And off the ice, he had some problems with drinking and behavioral issues. He was suspended a couple of times, and even in that game, in Game 1 of the 90 final, he was benched for the whole third period or something like that, just for just lack of. His head wasn't in the game, and then finally they were like, all right, third overtime, we're running out of people. They put him back in, and he scored the game-winning goal. So nice.
So you said he was only 58. Was this just hard living catching up with him, or what was
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
It seems like it.
Yeah.
And because he had purportedly gotten, cleaned up over the years, but I didn't see a cause of death listed, but I'm assuming that it was just kind of,
Yeah.
But one of those, there's a name that I also remember, because he's also Peter.
Yeah.
And it's spelled in the kind of, Eastern European way, P-E-T-R. I don't know if that's strictly Czech, or I think the Slovaks, the P-E-T-R, Petr Klíma. So that's tip of the hat.
It never occurred to me that your name is commonly abbreviated PTR. It never occurred to me that is very close to just the word Peter. So have you ever thought about just changing your name to PTR,
and just pronouncing it Peter?
Yeah, just pronouncing it Peter. It's no vowels.
I hadn't thought of that.
Wheel of
I'll think about it now.
Yeah. Well, my next honoree is a fellow by the name of William Bill Saluga. And not a name that probably a lot of people know. He was 85 years old. He was a comedian, actor. He got his start with the Ace Trucking Company, which was an improv comedy group. Fred Willard used to be in it. So he's that generation. He's, as an actor, he was in tons of stuff. He was in Seinfeld. He was in Curb Your Enthusiasm, Blossom, and of course, The Jerk 2. He was my favorite
one of your favorite genres.
Yes. But by
the
far,
odd sequel.
His greatest fame came as the character Raymond J. Johnson Jr., the mustachioed, cigar-chomping, zoot-suited fella. I don't know. Yeah, and
Palooka? I don't know.
He, it's difficult to explain if, it's one of those you had to be there kind of things. His claim to fame was he had this character, and he became famous through a series of beer commercials. He was also on some variety shows, Johnny Carson and Red Fox, but his whole shtick was that you would ask him his name, and he would say, well, what's your name? Raymond J. Johnson. And then he would say, you don't have to call me Johnson. You can call me Ray, or you can call me Jay, and you can call me RJ. And every permutation of the name Raymond Johnson Jr. You can call me Junior. You can call me Junie. All these different things. And then it would end with him saying, but you don't have to call me Johnson. And people laughed uproariously at this. Like, if you go on YouTube, you can see multiple clips of him doing it. And everyone is always...
Not only him doing it, but people laughing.
Yeah, but in a way, he almost feels kind of like the Ernest, like from Ernest Goes to Camp of his day, and that he was like a commercial pitch man who kind of had, a character that became, well known. Although he certainly didn't have a string of hit and direct to video movies the way Ernest did. But
well, if there was a different time, maybe
Yeah, who knows? Now he'd have a Netflix series,
right? Streaming series.
Yeah. So someone I have been fascinated with for years, just because it was such a, when you're a kid and you see someone like that, you just assume that they are famous in other things. Like,
right.
When you're a kid and you're like, well, I don't know who that is, but grown-ups must know who that is. And they must be a justifiably famous person. But he really just said it was kind of a one trick thing.
Kind of compare and contrast with somebody we talked about, was it 2 weeks ago, I guess, Harry Belafonte, where you just see him on the Muppet Show and you're like, oh, he's just I guess he's just a singer. And then you scratch the surface and you're like, oh, wow, he's got this whole storied life.
Yeah, totally.
Versus where you're like, oh, nope, this is all there is to this guy. He just did that thing.
Well, I mean, I don't bear him any ill will.
Oh, yeah, not to take anything away from him.
Pay you to do it, then you're, sure, more power to you. And so... I also
fast forward to years from now, where people are just like, Pete the Retail, that's that Star Wars Minute guy. That's all he did. Right?
Star Wars Minute. That was their catchphrase.
That was his catchphrase. So
yes. So goodbye, funny man, to William Bill Raymond Johnson Jr. We don't have to call him Johnson, but we will call him a beloved entertainer.
Oh, hey, speaking of calling, we're trying out something new on the show, right?
Yes, we are having a special guest commentator, Joe Dator, cartooning legend Joe Dator is here to talk about another cartooning legend, Sam Gross, who passed away in the past week. So let's bring in Joe. And joining us now over the interwebs is Joe Dator to tell us a little bit about cartoonist Sam Gross. Hello, Joe.
Hello, guys. Happy to be here as part of your show about death. I feel it's a great concept for a show. Plus, you have the perfect finale episode kind of built into it.
Exactly.
You're talking about people dying, and then the last episode, you guys die.
Well, one of us who died with Pete and Alex, it'll be the last one. Then eventually it'll be, or it could just be like, hey, who died with Alex? And it's Pete. That's the.
Oh yeah, okay. But if you could sync it up so that it's like the big finale is you both die on the same show, that'd be great. And it's kind of
that would be Thomas Jefferson and John Adams.
It builds that because, like you, like me, like everyone, we're all gonna die, and I like that you're leaning into that. There's no getting around it. There's just no getting around it.
Eventually, we will showcase everyone on this show.
Yeah.
Because we all will die. Mm-hmm. So tell us about Sam Gross.
Sam Gross. Sam Gross was a cartoonist. And if you've never heard of him, you have heard of him. Because everyone has seen his most famous cartoon. And his most famous cartoon was one that was from the National Lampoon from the 1970s. I think 1970 specifically, and it's the cartoon of the French restaurant, and the sign says frog legs, and you see a poor paraplegic frog wheeling himself out with no legs from the kitchen on a little dolly with wheels. And that was Sam Gross's claim to fame. That cartoon was originally ran in the National Lampoon, and the original of it sold recently for $20,000, I believe.
Wow.
It's been reprinted, it's been made into posters and t-shirts and everything. And so if you've never heard of Sam Gross, you've definitely seen that cartoon somewhere. that was Sam Gross. And that was the essence of Sam's humor. It was always very dark and very, very shocking and hilarious, but at the same time, very, very cute, because the poor little frog on the dolly is adorable. And it makes the cartoon so much funnier because you really feel for this poor little frog who's lost his legs. But also, along with those outrageous cartoons that he did, mostly for like the National Lampoon, and he did a lot of cartoons for Skin magazines, a lot of things for like, Gent and things like that. All those like cheap girly magazines you used to see. But also he'd do cartoons for Good Housekeeping. He would also do cartoons that were very sweet and wholesome and adorable. So his other most famous cartoon that you've also probably seen is the one where it's two snails and there's a sort of classic Scotch tape dispenser, and one of the snails is saying, "I don't care if she's a tape dispenser, I love her." And and that's such a sweet little good-natured kind of adorable cartoon. That one ran in the New Yorker. And that's the two sides of Sam Gross. He was dark and outrageous and also sweet and cute. And even his darkest cartoons were kind of good-natured. They were never mean-spirited. And I kind of knew Sam a little. He, I would see him at the New Yorker, and he was always incredibly prolific. And it's a true fact. I forget the exact number, but he had something like 36,000 cartoons that he had drawn over the years.
Wow.
Yeah. And he kept each one of them like meticulously filed and with all the information about how much money he had made from each one of those cartoons.
Oh, wow.
He was really, really good businessman too, But I always envied him because I'm not very prolific. Sam could do a book of cartoons on a single topic. Like he put out a whole book of cartoons, just cat cartoons. I don't have 150 cartoons on any one topic. And people come to me and said, "Oh, could you do like a whole book of cat cartoons?" No, I can't. I don't have that many on any one topic. And Sam did whole book of cat cartoons, whole book of dog cartoons. And one day I saw him at the New Yorker and he said, "I'm doing a whole book of cartoons about swastikas." And he did. He put out a whole book, and every single cartoon in the book had a swastika in it. It was a joke about a swastika sometimes. I always thought he hated me. Like I met him when I first went in there. I think he probably did hate me because I was like the new guy. And he was always this he was a cranky, grumpy guy. And he looked and sounded a little like Mo Sislak, And he would always complain about everything. My friend Jason called him the Kvetcher-in-Chief. That's what he was. He was always like, "They're trying to screw me." You'd hear him having conversations saying, "I'm doing this book and they're trying to screw me on the deal." He was always concerned. Everyone was trying to screw him. "They're trying to screw me." But also, he would always give you the advice, "Don't let him screw you." Which was great advice, for like a freelancer.
Yeah.
Always read the fine print, the contract. Don't let him screw you. He was always a defender and a crusader for us getting paid and getting our due,
You mentioned he was cranky. Was he funny too? Was he one of these cartoonists who's funny, or is he not funny in real life?
He was funny, but he was funny in his sort of bluntness,
Mm-hmm.
I remember him we went to a meeting up at the New Yorker, and it was to tell us all about the deal, the new contract for the royalties that they're giving us. And we're at the end of the meeting, because he didn't give a damn about anyone. At the end of the meeting, he just got up and walked down and loudly proclaimed, "That's a crock of shit." And there's nothing funnier than that to me. It was him just not caring at all and just proclaiming that out loud. Didn't matter to him, didn't bother him at all. Because he had this thing about how if you're just doing it for one client, don't depend on that one client, which of course I do. But he gave me that advice. And one time, my most cherished Sam memory is when we were having lunch and he sat across the table from me and said to me, you're not a cartoonist. Because you only draw, when you get up in the morning and draw, you're doing it for the New Yorker. When I get up in the morning and draw, I'm doing it for me. That was his philosophy. And he would draw the cartoons he wanted to draw for himself that made him laugh with, terrible things happening to the little match girl. And then he would sell them to whoever wanted them. And mostly it was the New Yorker, So I understood where he was coming from, because he came from an era when there were a lot more markets. There was the Saturday Evening Post, there was Collier's, there was Playboy, there was the National Lampoon. He never actually, I don't think he sold to Playboy at some point, because I remember he hated Hefner. And Playboy gave a bad deal. Playboy would buy all rights. They would own your work for whatever they paid for it. And you wouldn't retain the rights to your work. So he wouldn't, that was very much against his way of doing business. So he wasn't in Playboy, but there were a lot more markets. So he was a guy who would go around every magazine selling whatever cartoon he had, in those days. By the time I started, the New Yorker was pretty much the only game in town. And it's even more so now, because now there's not even Mad Magazine or, any place really. So, but his advice was, because you just do it for the New Yorker, you're not a cartoonist. But he meant it well. That's the thing about Sam, was he was always good-natured. He was always, as irascible and cranky as he was a kind, generous person. He meant it. He was trying to help. He was trying to help me. He was really trying to give me good advice,
Yeah.
But he scared the shit out of me.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe. Joe Dator, everyone. Check him out in the New Yorker and elsewhere.
Yes, joedator.com. You can find all my swag, all my stuff there. And I pray that someday I create something as great as Sam Gross did. Well, thanks for inviting me on, guys.
Sure.
Yeah.
And goodbye forever.
Well, thanks, Joe, for that insight into a cartooning legend. It's kind of sobering in a way, because, here's this guy who's done, like Joe said, thousands and thousands and thousands of cartoons. And I think, I guess that's true for most people. Most people aren't really, their work does not extend beyond their life. You know what I mean? So it's a sobering thought to that. Hear this guy produce thousands and thousands of hours. I mean, we'll live on forever, of course, with our various podcasts and things like that.
Magic of digital media.
Yeah. Our ghosts
will be haunting the world until the heat death of the universe.
Yeah. I wonder if that will get creepy if there's all these podcasts by people who are now passed away. Or do you think
it'd be like listening to old albums,
just
comedy albums or something?
Oh, yeah,
like that.
that's true.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I guess that will wrap up this cataloging of who died this past week. And if there's anyone you think we missed, you can leave a comment below if you're watching this on the YouTube channel. And until next week, goodbye forever.
Who died?